Masi, Creator, may your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Masi.
Welcome, colleagues. Minister statements. Minister for Status of Women.
Madam Speaker, later today I will be tabling a draft work plan that outlines how the Government of the Northwest Territories will undertake the preparation of an action plan to respond to the calls for justice presented in the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing, Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. This document represents this government's next steps forward in addressing the systemic causes of violence directed at Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people. The 231 calls for justice are far-reaching and complex. Developing a response is not simply a matter of reviewing and signing off on work already being done. This process will take a careful and thorough review of what we are currently doing, realistically and honestly assessing the effectiveness of what we are doing now, what we need to do in the future, and setting targets to measure progress moving forward. The work plan also asks N.W.T departments to review and analyze how well our current programs, services, and policies reflect the spirit and intent of the calls for justice, and what could be done to address the inequities identified in the calls to justice. Madam Speaker, this government is already doing a lot to address these calls for justice. We have partnerships and bilateral agreements in place with a number of Indigenous governments. We have and continue to collaborate with Indigenous and community organizations in providing programs and services that respond to the needs of Northwest Territories residents. Indigenous languages, traditional knowledge, and respect and valuing of culture are already incorporated into many of our programs and services and are an integral part of how we do business. As a government, we pride ourselves in our ability to work with community partners. The calls for justice also direct that Indigenous governments, community governments, territorial NGOs, local organizations, and people with lived experience be engaged and given an opportunity to help shape how governments respond to the calls for justice. The draft work plan I am tabling later today includes engagement in the Northwest Territories as we prepare our response to the calls for justice. There is a lot for the Government of the Northwest Territories to absorb and consider in responding to the final report, and we are committed to thoughtfully considering and responding to each of the calls for justice. We also recognize that some of the calls for justice may take longer to implement than others. For example, there are calls to establish new legislation or revise existing legislation, and this takes time. However, this does not mean we will forget about this important work or put it on the back burner. When preparing the N.W.T's action plan, we also have to be mindful that the Government of Canada is working on the development of a national action plan in response to the calls for justice. Territorial officials will continue to collaborate at the federal, provincial, and territorial level to ensure that the Northwest Territories has a voice nationally. The draft work plan is a living document. It will be reviewed regularly to measure progress and to make any changes necessary to address the evolving nature of this work. I want to assure the members there will continue to be opportunities to provide input throughout the process. Survivors and families of missing and murdered Indigenous women in the Northwest Territories deserve our respect and our help. We are working with departments to develop and implement a timely and comprehensive response so that we support them in their healing journeys. I do want to note that the Government of Canada has created a support line that is available for anyone affected by missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and who may need immediate emotional assistance. The support line can be reached at 1-844-413-6649. Madam Speaker, the N.W.T welcomed the recommendations of the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. We are focused on and committed to improving the safety and well-being of Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people now and in the future. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minister statements. Minister responsible for workers, Safety, WSCC.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to highlight some of the work the Workers' Safety and Compensation Commission is doing to support employees, workers in the Northwest Territories during COVID-19 global pandemic. The Workers' Safety and Compensation Commission acted swiftly to put in place financial relief measures for employers who are unable to make their assessment payments. These measures extended the deadline from the first installment of 2020 assessment payments to August 1st and gave valuable time to employers to adjust their payroll estimates and to make their payments later in the year without facing late penalties. Madam Speaker, many businesses have remained open or have successfully remained open during the pandemic or continue to safely with the support of the Office of the Chief Public Health Officer, working in partnership with the Workmen's Safety and Compensation Commission. As part of the Emerging Wisely plan, employers must complete an exposure control plan for work that they will identify and manage the risk of COVID-19. An exposure control plan is a requirement under the Northwest Territories Safeties Act and Northwest Territories Occupational Health and Safety Regulations. Employers are responsible for ensuring a healthy and safe workplace, and that responsibility has not changed. Employers do not need to send their exposure control plan to the Workers' Safety and Compensation Commission for approval. However, Workers' Safety and Compensation Commission's occupational health and safety inspectors will only request a copy of the completed plan from employers when they are responding directly to concerns or doing an inspection. To date, Workers' Safety and Compensation staff have provided direct assistance to over 2,500 employees through outreach and inspections to help them to develop their pandemic exposure control plan and to put practical solutions in place. Many employers and industry organizers have proactively reached out to the Workers' Safety and Compensation Commission for their assistance, showing the commitment that employers here in the Northwest Territories have to keep their staff and their customers safe. As other parts of Canada see their pandemic cases numbers rise, Workers' Safety and Compensation Commission remains committed to support local businesses to review their plans regularly to make sure that they are prepared and to continue to provide support as they continue to protect the health and safety of workers, clients, and customers. There are a number of great resources available on the Workers' Compensation and Compensation Commission's website. I strongly encourage any businesses that have concerns about how to do a good risk assessment or put a plan in place to look for guidance or get in touch with our Workers' Safety and Compensation Commission. Finally, Madam Speaker, I'd like to recognize the contribution of 3 outgoing members of the Workers' Safety and Compensation Commission's Governance Council. President Mr. Dave Tucker, Mr. Abe Thiel, and Mr. Jack Rowe. I would like to thank the members for their service and important work overseeing the Workers' Safety and Compensation Commission and representing the interests of workers, employers, and the general public. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minister's statement. Minister for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Madam Speaker, today I'm pleased to announce the successful distribution of $1.583 million in COVID emergency support funding for sports organizations. This funding has been provided by the Government of Canada through the Department of Heritage Emergency Support Fund and Culture, Heritage and Sports organizations. The funding provides additional temporary relief to sport organizations and helps them plan for the future. The funding is being used to support the continuation of sport and recreation programming operating across the Northwest Territories. The funds will enable them to support the healthy lifestyle goals outlined in the Government of the Northwest Territories Emerging Wisely plan to manage the impacts of the pandemic. Municipal and Community Affairs distributed funding for sports and recreation programming in the amounts of $721,000 to 33 communities, community governments, $634,000 to territorial sports organizations, and $228,000 to territorial and regional sports and recreation non-government organizations. Madam Speaker, the innovative projects being supported through this funding are impressive. They include outdoor events such as cultural day camps and fishing, trapping, and traditional Indigenous games, upgrades and repairs to outdoor sports and recreation areas like parks as well as skiing and hiking trails. And some of the programs offered so everyone is interested can participate even when attendance restrictions are limited, the number of people at any single event. Cleaning supplies and professional protective equipment for staff, online programming, and extra staff and additional cleaning costs. Community governments have also been reaching out to the schools to support students and residents across for service so that health and wellness can be supported in these challenging times. Madam Speaker, MACA continues to support community governments and sports and recreation organizations dealing with impacts of the pandemic by extending resources from all existing programs. Communities have demonstrated the flexibility to adapt programs to deal with restrictions under the public health order. Madam Speaker, the Government of Canada supports the N.W.T sports programming could have not come at a better time. Through innovative planning and careful health and safety measures, this funding will be supported and important to sports and recreation programming that directly impact the physical and mental health of the Northwest Territories residents. Merci, Madam Speaker.
Minister statements. Minister for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we know that family violence continues to be a serious issue. The Northwest Territories consistently records among the highest rates of violence against women, as reported by Statistics Canada. 2 women have been murdered in the last 2 months. This violence is as heartbreaking as it is unacceptable. As a territory, we need to do better. This month is Family Violence Prevention Month in the Northwest Territories. Let's take time to focus on promoting a change in attitudes and behaviors about violence against women and the harm that comes with it. The government is dedicated to providing the necessary resources to reduce the incidence of family violence in the territory and better support those who have experienced this type of trauma. We know that family violence can have a lifelong impact on children and youth and influence how their relationships are formed. It's critical that we do everything we can to stop this cycle and promote positive, healthy relationships. Madam Speaker, the response to family violence involves many N.W.T departments and agencies taking a whole-of-government approach. It also requires us to work closely with our community partners to ensure the solutions reflect the priorities of the communities. We have established an interdepartmental working group that will review N.W.T programs and services providing family violence supports. This team is working on an action plan on the calls to justice from the final report of the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls National Inquiry. This work will contribute to addressing the issue of domestic violence, among other things. We look forward to seeing the results. Madam Speaker, family violence shelters are a territorial resource that can be accessed 24 hours a day. There are shelters in Tuktoyaktuk, Inuvik, Yellowknife, Hay River, and Fort Smith. Even if there is not a shelter in your community, travel assistance is available to get to one. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it's not necessary to call 811 to get an exemption to public health orders to be in a shelter with non-family members. Call the Family Crisis Line directly at 1-866-223-7775. Staff will help you make a safety plan if required and apply for an emergency protection order to keep the abuser away. Shelters also provide a range of support programs for women and children who are trying to leave an abusive relationship. Shelter supports include counseling, case management and referral, support in identifying housing and income supports, links to transitional housing, and most importantly, a safe place to stay. For the 5 communities with shelters, the N.W.T provides $3.5 million annually in core funding. In addition to this, we appreciate the support of the federal government, which in August announced one-time only funding of $321,000 to support cleaning in the shelters. Madam Speaker, we believe that the incidence of intimate partner family violence is likely escalating during the COVID-19 pandemic. Families may be stressed by the challenges they face, and self-isolation may make things worse. In the early stages of the pandemic, very few women were seeking admission to the family violence shelters. However, at the same time, the number of emergency protection orders increased. Although these trends are disturbing, as a government, we have implemented a number of measures to intervene at this difficult time. We have communicated to residents that N.W.T family violence shelters remain open and available. We have distributed over 150 cell phones to victim service providers to distribute to those in need. This ensures there is a safe way for women to seek information and support. The N.W.T helpline, community counseling services, and child and youth care counselors remain ready to help. We are continuing to monitor this situation closely and encourage anyone who needs help to reach out to one of these supports. Madam Speaker, as a territory, we cannot afford to view family violence as a special awareness week or a one-time initiative. The health and well-being of our residents depends on a coordinated approach to breaking the silence and working together in meaningful ways to end all forms of family violence. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minister statements. Minister statements. Member statements. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in November of 2000, I'll start over. Madam Speaker, in November of 1918, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the First World War ended. Beginning in 1919, Armistice Day, now referred to as Remembrance Day in Canada, was first observed throughout the British Commonwealth. This was to observe the Armistice Agreement that ended the First World War. Subsequent to that, new conflicts arose and continue to rise to this very day. And to this day, we still have many Canadians placed in harm's way. Madam Speaker, remembrance is not only the right thing to do, but it is our duty and our moral duty. Although it is but one brief moment on November 11th, as Canadians, we pause for that moment of silence, and during that pause and during that silence, we remember and honor all those men and women who now serve, have served, and those who have sacrificed their lives for Canada. Madam Speaker, throughout our history, more than 23 million Canadians have served, while more than 118,000 have died to protect us, all to provide present and future generations with a chance at a safe, healthy, and bright future. This recognition and sacrifice is why Canada, along with the Northwest Territories and 8 other jurisdictions, declared Remembrance Day a statutory holiday. Madam Speaker, for those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice for us, and for those that continue to protect us, I would ask and encourage all residents of the Northwest Territories to take the time to pause, reflect, and think of those persons, not only on November 11th, but each and every day going forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member statements. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Food security can generally be defined as having reliable access to a sufficient quantity of affordable and nutritious food. The 2019-2023 mandate of this government identifies actions to support food security with food industry development, increasing country food harvesting, and improving Nutrition North. We have an agriculture strategy called the Business of Food, a name that implies the largely commercial focus of its initiatives. These are helpful, but the almost exclusive focus on agriculture as a business will not necessarily lead to food security. We have a lot of work to do and a lot of questions to answer. COVID has brought the issue of food security to the forefront. This summer, the requirements for social distancing and isolation prompted many more people to grow their own food in home and community gardens and to get out on the land and water and harvest country foods. In the N.W.T, we did experience some disruption to our supply chains through the cancellation of flights and reductions in trucking. What lessons did we learn from this past harvest, and was our government there to support this convergence of interest and necessity of local food production during the pandemic? There have been some incredible examples of food security in the N.W.T over the last season, including the Great Potato collaboration with a donation of 50,000 pounds of seed potatoes by an Alberta farmer, and the development of a local market garden in Cam Lake on a basic gravel pad. It's hard to know how successful our current programs and supports are towards food security when there appears to be no clear measurement of agricultural or country food production and consumption by our Bureau of Statistics. If you don't measure it, how can we gauge the effectiveness of even our current focus on agribusiness? I'll have questions for the Minister of ITI on how we can build real food security in the N.W.T, learn from the lessons of the pandemic, and ensure we can actually measure progress. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Member statements. Member for Deschaux.
Merci, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the N.W.T is the only jurisdiction in Canada that has an Official Languages Act that recognizes 11 official languages. I'll give the Minister of EC and E the honour of naming them all at the appropriate time. The Official Languages Act recognizes that preserving and enhancing the use of official languages is a shared responsibility of the Legislative Assembly, the G&W-T, and the N.W.T language communities. The Official Languages Act establishes 3 legislative bodies that play a role in protecting, revitalizing, and promoting Indigenous languages. The Minister responsible for the Official Languages Act has the responsibility for setting the direction and coordination of G&W-T policies and programs related to official languages. The Minister responsible for the Official Languages Act is the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Madam Speaker, I would like to recognize the interpreters that have been providing interpretation services for the duration of this current session. I understand due to COVID issues, not all the official languages are in attendance in the House. The interpreters are Podetlicho, or Dana name, Maro Drygeese Sundberg from Deda, Jonas Lafferty from Betchako. The proper terminology for North Slavey is Satuatini Yati, and we have Sarah Cleary, who is originally from Delaney, and Teresa Echinelli from Tulita. From South Slavey, the proper terminology is Denejati. We have Joe Tambor from Katludechi, it's the Hebrew Reserve. The Chippewan, for the proper terminology, is Dennis Ulini. We have Tom Unka from Fort Resolution and Dennis Drygeese from Tlutoke. For the French, and I just found out this is via live feed from Edmonton, we have Francine Lapointe and David Black. All the interpreters were provided with N.W.T flag pins and Legislative Assembly pins. Madam Speaker, this House is appreciative of the continued services the interpreters provide to the Legislative Assembly. So many of the language speakers in the Northwest Territories can keep abreast of the business of the House. Merci.
Member statements. Member for Trinidad-Willowdale.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'll be continuing on in talking about the affirmative action policy from yesterday. Madam Speaker, many of the problems that I see with the affirmative action policy has already been stated in this House at length over the years, including this week. However, I still see a few glaring gaps in the hiring processes in the N.W.T. It often impedes with the chances of Indigenous candidates from successful job competitions. And that's why this policy was created in the first place, to help even the even a playing field for underrepresented people to be hired by the N.W.T. As a member for the Tune of the Willow riding, I have heard many complaints of this process and heard many grievances from current employees that were shared with me because they were afraid of repercussions at work. So, Madam Speaker, picture this. You work for the N.W.T. To apply, there are several steps and procedures that must be followed, such as sending in your resume, being screened in, interviewed, and then going through further steps, such as reference checks before you're sent a job offer, and then so on, and then so on. Madam Speaker, one of the main issues being reported to me is that we are still seeing the newly hired N.W.T. indeterminate employees that are bypassing our HR processes. One loophole that I noticed, and after hearing everybody, my colleagues speak, I can clearly see that there are N.W.T. staff being hired through casual pools. Once hired as a casual, I have received reports they are getting job offers without even being interviewed. In my view, this is not acceptable or ethical. Madam Speaker, I know that the affirmative action policy has helped with the number of interviews Indigenous people will receive. However, this does not always translate to Indigenous hires by the N.W.T. I'm hoping we can fix that. More can be done based on everything we've heard recently, and there's an appetite to see some tangible changes in the way N.W.T. hires good, hard-working minorities into its workforce. Madam Speaker, I'll have questions for the Minister of Finance at the appropriate time.
Member statements. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. From today until November 11th, Canadians will mark Veterans Week and commemorate the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. Over 1 million Canadians from across our country in all walks of life enlisted and served, with 45,000 souls giving their lives in sacrifice for the greater good. Like many proud Canadians, several of my relatives have served our nation in a variety of capacities and conflicts, including in both world wars as well as the Korean War. My uncle, William Grant, my mom's brother, served as an airplane mechanic with the Royal Canadian Air Force, spending many years as a peacekeeper stationed overseas in places like Germany and the Suez Canal. Some of my favorite things about his visits as a child were his gifts of dehydrated Air Force rations and T-shirts with F-18s on them. One notable Canadian that always stands out in my mind when I think of November 11th is Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, poet, physician, and author who served with the Canadian Expeditionary Force as a medical officer in the First World War. He gave his life for our country, but left behind the precious legacy of his poem, In Flanders Fields, still recited by school children across Canada every year. Every year, I wear my poppy with pride as I think of all of the brave men and women who sacrifice so much for the well-being of others. And every year, I feel the significance and weight of the day even more. And this year, I plan to visit some of the resources available online to honour and remember Canada's veterans, including those in my own family. Yellowknife's Remembrance Day ceremony will be held at reduced capacity this year, so I encourage everyone to join me and attend the Legion's virtual ceremony online at 10:50 a.m. on November 11th, and take time that day and every day to give thanks to those who ensured our freedom today. Thank you.
Member statements. Member for Tabacha.
Madam Speaker, making changes for the betterment of the people and lands in which we serve is what we were put in this House to do. As elected leaders, we have a duty and responsibility to enact the changes that we committed to, which help propel us into this House. We each have a mandate entrusted upon us by our constituents, with the expectation that we work together and make positive changes. Madam Speaker, change is never realized or accomplished easily. Change is always met with resistance. There will always be those who prefer or even enjoy the status quo, because that is what they are used to. Changes will never take effect if there is an inability or outright refusal to think outside the box. Madam Speaker, people who are resistant to change are comfortable with the status quo. They are comfortable with keeping things the way they are. Well, Madam Speaker, maintaining the status quo is not what I was put in this House to do. I was put here to stand up to the status quo and to fight for the little guy, to fight for justice, to fight for my community of Fort Smith, and do right for all the people of the Northwest Territories. Madam Speaker, thinking outside the box can be an amazing thing. As leaders, we can accomplish nearly anything that we put our minds to. All it takes is some political will. Political will, however, is not just a flowery speech with little concrete action. Political will requires critical thinking, decisive action, and it requires working together as we achieve common goals for the people we represent. Madam Speaker, regardless of where any of us are in this House stands on any issue, my hope is that at the end of each day, we're able to come together at the table and be open for change to take effect. We need to have open minds and open hearts if we ever intend to enact any substantive changes over the course of this 19th Assembly. I seek unanimous consent to complete my station, Madam Speaker.
The member is seeking unanimous consent to complete her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may complete your statement.
Lastly, Madam Speaker, I would like to wish all of my colleagues well as we conclude our final day of session today. I hope you all enjoy some time off until we return for our committee work in a couple of weeks. I hope we may all return with fresh ideas and change on the horizon. I'd also like to thank my amazing constituents of Tabasha for their continued support of me and for the work we do here at the Legislative Assembly. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member statements. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't normally think about Christmas until after Remembrance Day. So let me start by thanking those brave men and women who serve in Canada's armed forces, especially those who have given their lives in defense of our great country. I hope everyone will be joining in the festivities or paying their respects on Remembrance Day in their home communities with myself and my Ranger brothers and sisters. I look forward to seeing them when I get home. Now, since that day, it's just the last day in the House before Christmas and the holiday season, and Christmas is 50 days away, and business planning is coming. For my biggest, this is my Christmas wish list for N.W.T. For the biggest present, I need 35 houses, at least 10 for Tuck, Ullakuktuk, and Paultuck, and 5 for Sachs Harbour, and my eldest facility for Ullakuktuk, which is going to come before we're done here in the next 4 years, Madam Speaker. The Housing Corporation must reach out to the Community IRC Corporation to help make sure that we spend the $60 million that we desperately need. N.W.T. needs Housing Corporation to remove policies and barriers to keep low-income from elderly from maintaining their homes. People should not have homeowners insurance that still need the work to be done. Insurance in my riding is not a luxury, Madam Speaker. N.W.T. needs from Municipal Community Affairs first need to find that the Paultuck to finish their sewage lagoon, and you're not taking that $53,000 back. We got to have that spent for you. I haven't raised up this in the House, but the Hamlet of Tuck is we recently upgraded our community road, so any damages the school project's going to do, that the government's on top for it, so they're going to pay if there's any damage to the road, but it's going to be minus 50 pretty soon, and there ain't going to be no damages. Minister Archie, I'd like to thank you for this upcoming successful sea lift season, so start planning now for next season. Yeah. So you had an awesome crew doing your work up in my riding. Meeting with, and then I look forward to meeting with you and my leadership in Tuck for the Tuck and Nuvik Highway for the maintenance program that we're going to start establishing, working towards. Since the minister is responsible for NTPC, don't be surprised. You know, I don't like those limiters, so please rethink. Please rethink, because I don't want to bring it into a motion. Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude their statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Maybe we could give those limiters away for Christmas presents as an ornament. So anyways, Madam Speaker, NTPC, get rid of them. Minister Green, as the pandemic wears on, the impact multiplies and the people travel repeatedly for medical appointments. So let's make it a priority for testing to ensure that they spend most of the possible time with their families and making those rapid testing kits for the medical travelers. Looking forward for our tour next week, our next 2 weeks in my riding of N.W.T with you, and looking forward to that. Premier Cochrane, please spend that COVID money that we just approved with you. Be really frugal. Make sure it's spent in the right place, and thank you for the work you guys are doing. Needs the people, the needs of our people and the funding are limited. Let's make this government and money is spent helping the most needy and vulnerable residents in the territory. I wish my constituents in the N.W.T, my colleagues in this House and the people in Northwest Territories safe and happy holiday season. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member statements. Member for Cam Lake.
Madam Speaker, I read a thought-provoking and upsetting article in the Globe and Mail by Arlen Dumas, Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. Chief Dumas is denouncing Manitoba's Bill 2, the Budget Implementation and Tax Statutes Amendment Act, arguing that there are 2 items buried in this omnibus bill threatening to further perpetuate poverty and vulnerability for Manitoban First Nations people. The first affects children in care, 90% of whom are First Nations. As Chief Dumas explains, in 2005, the Manitoba government redirected federal funding meant to support these kids to flow through the province, arguing the province was paying for care. Since then, over $388 million has diverted to Manitoba's general revenues. Bill 2 affirms this policy and forbids First Nation foster children from taking court action to seek repayment. I agree with Chief Dumas, who says it is wrong to steal from First Nations children. It is wrong to take away their basic rights to seek redress for the wrongs committed against them. In 2018, the Manitoba Public Utilities Board froze rates for customers on First Nations Reserve. Manitoba Hydro appealed and the court overturned the decision, resulting in a 6.5 increase for on-reserve customers effective September 2020. The Manitoba government is now giving itself the authority to impose hydro increases without board oversight and has proposed a 2.9% increase for residents. Consequently, Manitobans on reserve face a crippling and cumulative 9.6% increase in their power. Imagine, Madam Speaker, if that was your household. Chief Dumas says, this is what systemic racism looks like. It is unconscionable and it is wrong. This got me thinking. I have had many conversations with friends and constituents who don't really seem to understand what systemic racism is. Systemic racism lives in our dark corners. Because it is systemic, it is so ingrained in our colonial way of drafting laws and doing business that we don't see it for what it is. We need to shine a light on systemic racism and force it out into the open where it can be identified and eradicated. As Chief Dumas points out, Canadians support reconciliation and want a new relationship based on fairness and mutual respect. He has called on all politicians to listen and to act. I am listening, Madam Speaker, and will act by continuing the public dialogue needed to help end systemic racism. I'd like to see our government act by undertaking the work needed to identify where systemic racism hides in our own laws, regulations, and policies. In order to stamp it out, we need to root it out. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member statements. Member for Montfouille.
Merci, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker,
Madam Speaker, I would like to make a statement regarding elders. We have a mandate to protect the elders and for them to live in dignity. We have great respect for our elders, and they are our guides, and we don't want them suffering in any way. We need to do the best for them. We see a lot of the elders that are suffering, Madam Speaker.
The issue that the Montfouille constituents have is that of housing. Madam Speaker, I've been here for the past 15 years, and over those years, I've made so many statements on housing, too many that to remember, in fact, whether it be in a house, a cabinet table, or in the Speaker's office. Madam Speaker, one area that I'm most concerned about is how we treat our elders with respect to housing needs. I already brought up the N.W.T. Housing Corporation Minister the need to have a program in place so that qualified adjournment persons can travel to small communities, especially most isolated communities, to service their furnaces, plumbing, inspect water heaters, water and sewage tanks, etc. for our elders. Madam Speaker, I placed enough stories from my elderly constituents about black smoke coming out of their furnace, exhaust pipe, because of their furnace haven't been serviced for years. Surely, this cannot be safe, Madam Speaker. I'm not an oil burner mechanic, but something like this can lead to carbon monoxide poisoning in their homes, I'm sure. Madam Speaker, yesterday, my office sent an N.W.T. housing minister a picture of a water tank belonging to an elderly couple in N.W.T. yesterday, Madam Speaker. That water tank is operating with a screwdriver lodged to the side of the tank in order to plug a hole. When that screwdriver is removed, water starts leaking from the tank. Again, I'm not a qualifying technician, but this cannot be safe. In fact, I believe it will be a hazard in a household. Madam Speaker, I will have questions for the Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation at the appropriate time. Merci.
Member statements. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Northwest Territories regularly has one of the highest GDPs per capita in the world. We are consistently amongst one of the highest government spendings per capita in the world. No doubt the first stat is largely due to the fact that we have a small population and diamond mines, and the second fact is due to the difficulty of delivering services over such a vast territory. However, in this same time period, Madam Speaker, we have seen very little progress on many of our things. Our high school graduation rates, our housing, our inequality have all largely stayed the same or gotten worse. I have multiple times made statements in this House about the importance of a guaranteed basic income, as I believe this is the path to addressing some of these systemic issues. However, I want to emphasize that this isn't just a progressive issue. There's people on the left, certainly, our time in Yellowknife has called for this, but there is Conservative senators, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce has endorsed this, the Liberal Party in their caucus has made this a priority. I really believe there's political will across the political spectrum to look at this. And I want to emphasize that this is also about streamlining a number of programs. Right now we have a wage top-up program where if you're earning minimum wage, you get topped up to $18 an hour. But if you actually didn't apply for that and you applied for income assistance and say you had your child care covered, you'd get topped up to $25 an hour. So, because you're eligible if you were working full-time on minimum wage to get income assistance. So our income assistance is in fact also a wage subsidy program. But then we have other programs coming in such as from the feds, disability supports, old age supplements, guaranteed income supplement for the elderly, the Canadian Child and Benefit for parents with children, the working income tax benefit, we have the Northern Residents Tax Reduction. We also have things like the housing rent subsidy, CHAP funding, home heating subsidy for seniors. And I don't believe anyone is looking at how all of these programs interact and work together, especially once we get to the federal level. There seems to be some miscommunication. And so often the question is, how much does a guaranteed basic income cost? But I don't believe we can answer that unless we do the work and we figure out what is currently being spent across all departments and all levels of government supporting our most vulnerable. I will have questions for the Minister responsible for Education, Culture, and Employment if we can begin that work. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member statements. Member for Range Lake.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to recognize two residents of Range Lake, whose achievements have made our riding proud by winning the top marks in their trade and further levels. I'd like to recognize Michael Turner Davis, who's a Level 2 Automotive Service Technician, and Nathan Dunn, who's the Level 1 of the Sprinkler System Installer. Congratulations to you both and to all apprentices throughout the Northwest Territories for the work you do. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member statements. Member for Hay River North.
Madam Speaker, each year on November 11th, Canadians pause to remember the sacrifices of the men and women who gave their lives for our country so that we may enjoy the freedoms that we have today. I encourage residents to reflect on the bravery of Canadians, both past and present, who have put their lives on the line to protect the peace and safety that make up the fabric of our society. The heroes who have stepped up in the name of freedom and democracy have done so in conflicts that span every generation. During some of our darkest days, Madam Speaker, Canadians left their families behind to fight against the evils of the time to keep our country safe. For that, we are forever grateful. We must remember those who have been forever changed by war, those who never returned home, and the families, friends, and communities that continue to feel the impacts of those losses. Madam Speaker, they defended democracy and helped build peace here at home and around the world. They gave up their future for the future of others. And it's important that we take the time to reflect on this selflessness and honor those who answered their country's call. Remembrance Day is also a time to honor and thank all members of Canada's military for their service in times of war, conflict, and peace. Over the years, Canadians from all walks of life have stood in cooperation and friendship with our allies as we have contributed to the fight against forces of tyranny. Madam Speaker, we can never repay the debt we owe to the many men and women who have paid for our freedom with their lives. What we can do is remember their sacrifices and pay tribute to their bravery and patriotism, lest we forget. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member statements. Member for N.W.T. Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. National Skilled Trades and Technology Week is a Canada-wide event designed to promote awareness of the many opportunities in skills, trades, and technology. Awards are being provided to apprentices that have achieved the highest mark, equal or greater to 80% in their theory examination for their trade and level. As well, those who have achieved journey person status in 2019-2020. Today, I'm pleased to acknowledge the hard work of a couple constituents from N.W.T. Lake who are on their path to getting their journey person's trade status. I'd first like to acknowledge Joel Hanthorne, who successfully completed the second year of his construction electrician ticket. I'd also like to acknowledge Joseph Lemieux, who has successfully completed third year of his plumber gas fitter ticket. The trades are important to keeping people of the North safe. Our economy is moving ahead in a positive manner. Madam Speaker, there's always a need for tradespeople in the territories to build our houses, keep our roads, airports open, keep our ferries running. We need tradespeople to heat the lights and keep the water running. In short, Madam Speaker, we need tradespeople for everyday lives. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member statements. Member for Yellowknife South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I too want to acknowledge the National Skilled Trades and Technology Week here in Canada. And as my colleague from N.W.T. Lake has just outlined some of the important features that come from this opportunity to encourage the trades and for young people to gain skills. Madam Speaker, I am also very happy to take this opportunity to congratulate one of my constituents, Slavomir Rohak, for achieving this award and attaining one of the highest marks for the Level 2 Heavy Equipment Technician. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member statements. Member for Satu.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I'm going to be recognizing one of our Northwest Territories Housing Corporation's employees. The employee worked for us at the local housing authority in Sigachik. Madam Speaker, it is with great sadness and regret that I convey the news of the passing of a great Northerner, Miss Elaine Blake of Sigachik. I want to express my wholehearted condolences to her family and friends and to the residents of Sigachik for their loss. Elaine had been the local housing association manager in Sigachik for nearly 14 years. Prior to working as a housing manager, she was the recreation coordinator for the community of Sigachik, and prior to that, she was also the contractor for petroleum products division of the government of the Northwest Territories. Elaine was a long-term resident of Sigachik and had moved to the community in 1980. She was the mother of 2 boys, Jeremy and Darby, and 2 girls, Charlene and Sasha. She is also survived by 9 grandchildren. Madam Speaker, Elaine was very active in the community as a volunteer, helping with Mackenzie Valley Jamborees, canoe days, and spending her free time cooking for elders, and an avid canoeer. She enjoyed traveling the Northwest Territories to spend time on the water, canoeing, and competitions. She also enjoyed sharing traditional activities with her children and grandchildren. The Northwest Territories Housing Corporation will be missing her and her tireless work and her commitment to the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. The provision and affordable and the quality and the safety of adequate client service that she had provided. People tell me that she went door to door and always opened the door, and she was always available for people at any time, in any circumstance. She went above and beyond to meet the adequate client service of all public housing tenants. She addressed them seriously, and she addressed them with professionalism. Madam Speaker, our communities need more Elaine Lakes to display and to help us with our client service at the community level. I ask members of the House to join me in a moment of silence to celebrate the life of Miss Elaine Blake, a Northern hero. Merci, Madam Speaker.
Members, we'll have a moment of silence. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Member for Health and Social Services, or Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have a return to oral question asked by the member of Dutcho on October 16, 2020, regarding long-term care facility. The former health care centre building in Fort Providence was deemed surplus by the department when the new Health and Social Services Centre was constructed. It was determined by the Department of Health and Social Services and the Department of Infrastructure that the building had reached the end of its useful life from both a technical and program perspective. It would have been cost prohibitive to upgrade the facility and meet current healthcare design and infection control standards to continue to be used as a health facility. The Department of Health and Social Services has determined that building long-term care facilities in communities outside of regional centres is not feasible because of the high cost of building and operating a long-term care facility, the need for adequate nursing and personal care staff to operate it safely. The Department of Health and Social Services is committed to improving home care services to enable elders with care needs to remain living in their community longer. As part of the mandate commitment to support seniors to age in place with dignity, we are working with our partners in other government departments to identify gaps and help improve other services and housing options that meet the growing needs of seniors. With respect to the former health centre, the Department of Infrastructure is responsible for the disposal of the property in accordance with the N.W.T disposal of improved real property policy. I've been advised that in early October, the Minister of Infrastructure provided the member with an update on the disposal process for the former Fort Providence Health Centre, which is being done in accordance with this policy. I understand there is currently an assessment of the building underway, and the Department of Infrastructure has already received interest from local groups. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognitions of visitors in the gallery. Member for Range Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to recognize Elise Scott, who's a guest in our gallery. She's the Chief Governance Officer with WSCC and a resident of Range Lake. And I'd also like to take a moment, Madam Speaker, to recognize the media who have been here every day. And your work is critically important, and our work would be a lot harder without you. So thank you for being part of our work. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognitions of visitors in the gallery. Member for Nahende.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd also like to recognize Elise Scott, Chief Governance Officer, and Debbie Mallow, President and Chief Executive Officer for WSEC. I greatly appreciate the work that these ladies do, and they're very responsive, and they do great work, and so does WSEC. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome. It's been a while since we've had anybody in here. Recognitions of visitors in the gallery. Recognitions of member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd also like to recognize Debbie Malloy. She does great work as the President and CEO of the WSEC, but also great work as a Yellowknife North constituent. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognitions of visitors in the gallery. Recognitions of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Member for Trinidad-Willowday.
Madam Speaker, I had some questions to the Minister of Finance after my member statement today on affirmative action. So my first question is for the Minister is, Madam Speaker, will the Minister provide statistics on the number of direct appointments to the public service that have been made per year over the last 5 years? Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I can pull those numbers out and give some information for the member back to 2016, 2017. And actually, before I do that, Madam Speaker, let me just take note that there are currently 5,922 employees in the public servants, not including casuals. And as for those that were direct appointed in 2016-17, we have 122, 17-18, 97, 18-19, 124, and in 2019 into 2020, the number changes quite a bit because there were significant changes to the collective agreement. The number is 301, owing to the fact that there were a number of modifications in response to the collective agreement. And thus far, there are 76 thus far. But I would note that this year there was a number of direct appointments arising from what was the response to COVID-19. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Trinidad-Willowday.
Madam Speaker, and thank you for those stats. It's really important, I think, we have the public understand a little bit more about the direct appointment process. So I'll lead to more in my next line of questioning. So, Madam Speaker, I'd like to find out how many people find their way into the public service permanently by starting out in a casual position and getting direct appointed into an indeterminate position. So, will the Minister provide a breakdown of how many of the direct appointments were for people appointed into an indeterminate position from a casual one? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in the last 5 years, out of all the numbers I had just read, 224 of those went into an indeterminate position from a casual one. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Trinidad-Willowday.
Madam Speaker. Okay, thank you for that from the Minister. So will the Minister also provide a breakdown of how many of the direct appointments were Indigenous P1 status?
Thank you, Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I am trying to do math quickly. I don't have the breakdown for Indigenous Aboriginal Northwest Territories individuals here. In the last 5 years, I have 335 direct appointments were for Indigenous people, but I'm not. But again, in the way that the public service works, that can mean Indigenous to the Northwest Territories, not necessarily Indigenous Aboriginal. But I will see that I get a full breakdown for the member.
Thank you, Minister. Supplementary, member for Trinidad-Willowday.
Yeah, my apologies for interrupting, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the response. If we get those particular breakdown in writing, that'd be much appreciated. And my last question, and I'll get a little bit of, again, I want to speak to a little more. You know, this direct appointment process, you know, it's been criticized in the past as being an avenue for, you know, there's some political patronage there. And there's no transparency or accountability there. I think there should be some more checks and balances there. And there's other ways I think that this could be handled rather than running it through cabinet solely. Again, you know, it'd be nice to see like an HR representative or even one of my colleagues from the regular side sit on these direct appointments. Just an idea. Because you know what, anytime we do this and there's some sort of shot of secrecy here, and I guess what's the legal term? Act of omission, you know. We got to tighten up those loopholes, and so that's my comment on that. But my last question is, will the minister commit to developing options for a new, more accountable and transparent direct appointment approach?
Thank you. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to take that since it's a cabinet question. So currently the requirement for direct appointments is to be reviewed by Cabinet. It's established under the Public Service Act. So, and that ensures that appointments are being used appropriately. However, Madam Speaker, the Public Service Act is currently under review, and part of that review we can consider changes to the direct appointment process. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Members, oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. My questions are for the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment. My statement referred first to this government's mandate commitment to increase food security through food industry, increasing country food harvesting and improving nutrition north. So of course there's several tasks there. Can the Minister give us a brief update on this current status of this mandate commitment on increasing food security? Merci, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister of ITI.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there are quite a number of initiatives taking place right now. There is, of course, the Sustainable Livelihoods Program that is led by ENR. That was introduced back in August of 2019, and it includes a significant amount of work in terms of food security with respect to on-the-land and harvesting, mentorship of young people to engage in on-the-land harvesting and on-the-land food security. In addition to that, Madam Speaker, there is work happening over in Health and Social Services. They're responsible for meat regulations, responsible for anti-poverty funding, responsible for nutrition supports. In addition to that, Madam Speaker, Education, Culture and Employment is responsible for supporting students and income support individuals who may require supports with food security. Furthermore, Madam Speaker, there now is the Department of ITI with which I am standing to give a bit more information. ITI is responsible for the agriculture strategy, Madam Speaker, and for the implementation of that. We have recently put in place a senior advisor for food security. I think it is envisioned, Madam Speaker, that this individual will help coordinate all of this work that is clearly happening across the N.W.T. And currently that person is conducting an inventory of all of these different programs, and I have not mentioned an exhaustive list. I've given only the highlights. And one other one, I suppose, Madam Speaker, is the fish strategy with which ITI is responsible, and we have advanced that project just in the last month. And I have 2 hours scheduled just tomorrow, in fact, where I'll be sitting down with the department to see where that's at. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I want to thank the Minister for that. Could say something about fish there, but we had a great fish lunch today too. I mentioned that the pandemic did disrupt some of our supply chains, put our food security at some risk. There was a lot of renewed interest in local food production. I mentioned some of the wonderful projects that took place this summer. It's not clear, though, whether we took full advantage of that convergence of events and interest. Can the Minister tell us what lessons we've learned about building food security during this pandemic? Merci, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister of ITI.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there certainly has been a lot of work done in ITI around the supply chains, monitoring those supply chains and ensuring that they are supported. I would say that in the course of the pandemic and then the need to maintain the supply chains was an opportunity to develop a lot more relationships and good relationships across the supply chain, both from the grocery store and all the way to those who are transporting the food. In addition to that, there's been certainly a renewed interest in terms of food production. I'd be remiss not to note, Madam Speaker, that while there's a lot more interest in food security, which is certainly helpful to all of those programs I mentioned earlier, the convergence isn't entirely complete. There, of course, are challenges between do we provide, for example, the free seeds of potatoes, or do we encourage commercial production? It is not quite so simple, and there has to be a balance struck, but I think this opportunity over the summer was a chance to start having those conversations so that we can be better going forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I want to thank the Minister for that. I've looked for data and reports on the output of agriculture sector here in the Northwest Territories, and it's really hard to find anything. The ITI website has an agricultural sector profile page, but there's not much quantification there. Bureau of Stats doesn't seem to have much data on its web page either. So if of course you can't count it, how can we measure progress on building food security? Can the Minister tell us what steps she is taking to ensure that we can actually measure food security improvements with real targets and measurement of progress? Must see, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there was an initial sector-wide survey done back in 2017-2018, and as the agriculture strategy was getting rolling and being implemented, that does need to be updated, and another round of survey does need to get to take place in order to compare to that baseline. I would note one important thing that has happened this year, Madam Speaker, is the formation of a territorial agri-food association that can also help advocate for these issues and help ensure that when we are gathering the data that we are in fact going to the right places to gather the data from that membership. And so hopefully there can be in fact more information and more quantified information going forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I want to thank the Minister for that. I really look forward to counting carrots in the future, and we're going to get some hard stats, I guess. I spoke about how ITI's efforts on agriculture seem to be largely focused on business and commercial food production. I think that there's some real urgency in building a food security strategy here for the Northwest Territories. Can the Minister commit to developing a real food security strategy for the Northwest Territories that incorporates food self-sufficiency, including agriculture, country foods, inter-settlement trade, and programs that deliver on targets with regular evaluation and reporting? So can the Minister commit to a food security strategy for the Northwest Territories? Merci, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister of ITI.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the need to look at food security and to improve food security is part of the mandate of this government. But the ITI lead is focused largely on the commercial side of that. It is not the only side of the food security issue, and that is why Health and Social Services, EC&E, and ENR are also involved, because each department has a part to play. So, again, I can certainly reaffirm the commitment to achieve what's in the mandate, but I can't stand alone and say that there will be a particular strategy developed. I would again point back to the fact that we do have now the Senior Advisor of Food Security who can ensure that this work is being coordinated so that we can achieve the mandate item around food security. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge that the Department of ECE and Income Assistance does lots of great work, and we have one of probably the most generous income assistance programs in the country. I think the department even inherently recognizes some of the benefits of a basic income. During the pandemic, one of the first things we did is we payrolled people for 3 months to give them more guaranteed time to report. We also got rid of the productivity requirements such that they got their money whether they failed to show up for a meeting or whatnot. So I believe the roots are there, but I believe we need to break out and look what every department is doing and what the federal government is also doing to really make a proper guaranteed basic income. So my question for the Minister is ECE, as part of our income assistance review, will we conduct a feasibility assessment of a guaranteed basic income? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Member Minister of ECE.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I pretty much agree with everything the member has said, and his earlier in his statement as well. I think that, well, I'll just answer the question. Are we going to conduct a review or a feasibility study for universal basic income? No. But that is because I do think that the income assistance program has a strong foundation and we can build on it. In many ways, it's just tweaking a few rules here and there, and we have something that is very similar to what the member is talking about. And we've already made some of those changes. Some of the, and he mentioned those as well. He's doing my job for me today, so I think I'll leave it at that and wait for the next question. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So numerous policy studies have said that the biggest issue for implementing a guaranteed basic income is actually jurisdictional. It's getting the feds' money streams to line up with the provinces and territories. And I know every time the federal government rolls out a new program, we in income assistance have to go change and see whether we're going to include it or not is the first decision, and then we have to recalculate the housing subsidy, the senior subsidy, sometimes pensions get involved, and sometimes income assistance gets involved, and it causes this just bureaucratic mess of programs not aligning. The federal government, this Liberal caucus, has made a basic income one of their #1 priorities. Our Arctic framework #1 goal and the #1 priority is ending poverty. I believe when that framework comes out with lobbying, we could get it to be a guaranteed basic income. So is the minister willing to write to the federal government and lobby for us to be a pilot project for rolling out a basic income? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Member Minister of ECE.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm not going to write to the federal minister and ask that question. I'm going to look into what we're doing, how we can do it better, and when I have the conversations with the appropriate federal ministers and when I'm on these FTP calls, I will, have those types of conversations and promote the type of changes that we're looking at. The member mentioned there are a number of different programs that we offer across the N.W.T, across departments, and that the federal government offers as well. And within the N.W.T, part of the income assistance review is going to be looking at everything that's offered. What housing offers, what health offers, what ECE offers, because we need to move to a more streamlined approach. I think it'll cut down on paperwork, it'll make people's lives easier, and it'll be more client-centered. And I have no problem suggesting that the feds do something similar, but it's a little difficult to get the feds to change their programs just for us. The member mentioned that one of the biggest difficulties of implementing this is the feds. But I think one of the biggest difficulties for implementing a guaranteed universal basic income is the amount of money. I think it's as simple as that. If we had $50, $100, $800 million to put towards a guaranteed basic income, we could use that money to solve a lot of problems. This is a very blunt instrument. Maybe we put $100 million into aftercare for when people come back from treatment, they have a place to go where they know they can stay sober, they can avoid all the issues that lead them back on the road to addictions. And we can take another $100 million and we can build economies in small communities. We can take another $100 million and do this. So it's not as simple as just saying we want to do this. It's a lot of money. And I don't know if a blunt instrument like a universal basic income is something that would work necessarily in the territory, considering how different every community is. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yeah, I believe the problem with saying that it costs a lot of money is we haven't actually done the assessment to see what it costs. And we haven't looked at the way all of these programs are working together and how much is already being spent. And I personally believe we could actually lower income assistance if it meant we guaranteed the money for longer periods of time and with less bureaucracy I heard the Minister of Health the other day mention the idea of putting a seniors portal such that all the applications of funding for seniors is in one place, and I laughed because I know how impossible of a task that is. There is different pools of seniors funding across multiple levels of government, not to mention pensions, and trying to bring one person to bring that all together is extremely difficult. It requires political will. So, as part of the income assistance, can I get the commitment from the Minister that he will not only look across departments what we're doing, but also what the federal government is doing, and roll that into the cost analysis? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister Vicini.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yeah, we'll look at what everyone's doing. If we're going to review something, we're going to review the money a program that's solely about the money that people are getting. We're going to look at what money people are getting from every source. That includes the federal government. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess I've got a refusal to do a feasibility assessment. I've got a refusal to do a roadmap. Can I get something from the Minister that he can give me an idea of what we think this would cost? Because I honestly don't know. I don't know if there's already enough money that we could roll this out tomorrow, or whether it is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So can we do some preliminary costing, Madam Speaker?
Thank you. Minister Vicini.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last year, about 4,000 people accessed income assistance. If we were to pay each one of those people, the max amount that you can get on income assistance each year, it would be about $80 million. So that's an extra $50 million on top of the $30 million that we spend now. If we did a real universal basic income where everyone in the territory, regardless of income, gets that amount, we're looking at $800 million. So the very low end of this is $80 million. And to the member's point, if we spend money here, costs elsewhere go down. I get that. Same thing with education, but that doesn't mean that we have all of this money to put into these things. I would love to put money into education right from prenatal all the way up to post-secondary. I think that would solve all of our problems in a generation. This would be utopia. But the fact is there's needs now, and we can't, it's difficult to reallocate money that way. But, I'd be happy to sit down with the member and have these discussions, because income assistance is one of the areas that really hasn't been thoroughly reviewed in a number of years. And it's one of the areas that by the end of this assembly, I really want to make improvements to, so that we can get to a system similar to what the member is talking about. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my questions today are for the Premier. My first question is, what is this government currently doing to address the problem of systemic racism? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Across the government, we're taking a variety of actions to address systemic racism. It's a huge issue, and members have said 50% of our population is Indigenous. We've already talked all week about the affirmative action. We need to do something. So we're doing our best. We're ensuring that our decisions, including the creation of new programs and services, are all contemplated using what's called the Gender-Based Analysis Plus lens. Everything that we do should be considered through this lens. And it's not only about gender, it's not only about women and men, it's about how different groups in our territory will be affected differently by every decision, every policy, every program that we set up. We're also implementing modern treaties, including self-government agreements and land claims. This is an important part of what we do as the government of the Northwest Territories, and it respects Indigenous self-determination and self-governance as something I take totally to my heart. We're also implementing the United Nations Declaration and the calls to justice from the Truth and Reconciliation. As well, we have an Indigenous Employee Advisory Committee, which is committed to providing advice and feedback to HR Human Resources Branch with regards to identifying barriers and increasing the representation of Indigenous people at all levels of our public service. It also works to create an environment that supports and promotes Indigenous people currently within the government of the Northwest Territory workforce. As well, Madam Speaker, we meet with our counterparts in other jurisdictions to discuss best practices at all times. For example, the previous Minister of Justice, she attended an FPT meeting on systemic racism in the justice system, And subsequently, she reached out to the Indigenous governments and began a conversation about what we can do to start address some of these issues within the justice system, and that work is still carrying on. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Premier touched a little bit on my next question, but I'm wondering if she can expand on how the GNWT is doing this. My next question was about the gender-based analysis that the GNWT does with Cabinet and the Financial Management Board, and I'm wondering if she can explain what tools they use to ensure that there is a systemic racism lens used in that work as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Madam Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Management Board Secretariat has added Gender-Based Analysis Plus to the assessment process for Financial Management Board submissions, and I think this was new to our government. Wasn't done before, if I remember, so this is a huge thing. So the initial focus, again, on the Gender-Based Analysis Plus lens is on gender. However, like I said before, it takes on the differences for all populations, not only just about biological but it also considers our social, cultural issues and how different programs, etc., affect different people. We also have multiple characteristics that intersect and contribute to who we are. The Gender-Based Analysis Plus considers many other factors, like I said, considers race, ethnicity, religion, age, mental and physical disability, and how that interaction between these factors influence the way we might experience government policies and initiatives. Using the Gender-Based Analysis Plus lens when analyzing, planning, and making decisions means carefully and deliberately examining the implementations of our work in terms of gender and other factors. Madam Speaker, it's not easy work, but it's critical work and important if we do recognize that our population is half Indigenous and half other, and we really take this work seriously. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, some of the regulations and laws that contain a lot of kind of those hidden moments or hidden pieces of systemic racism are ones that we often overlook and have been in our system for decades. And so I'm wondering what work is being done right now to kind of dig those out and make sure that all of those pieces of legislation and pieces of policy work are being used on that lens, because a lot of the programs that are getting that lens are new programs. So what are we doing about our old existing programs? Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Madam Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to start by saying that when I heard the story from the member about how another jurisdiction had kind of slipped thing in, I've always said in this throughout my term that I'm really glad that we're a consensus government, because we have a different way of bringing legislation. It's not just if you have a majority government or you have to work more if you're a minority government. Within our consensus government, it means that all members have a say in how we move forward with that. So again, it's another example how I'm really proud that we are a consensus government of the N.W.T. The other thing too is within our mandate, we committed this government to work with our Indigenous governments to create and implement an action plan that identifies the changes required in our GNWT legislation and policies to best reflect the principles set out in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We're still committed to doing this work. It is, again, going to take a lot of work, but if we're going to do this, we need to do it right, and it is a commitment of this government as we move forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Final supplementary, member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as an MLA, a lot of times we have specific case-by-case issues that come to our desks from constituents, and sometimes we solve that problem at face value without looking at the bigger picture of what's going on with a constituent and how we can sometimes are able to change that situation for our territory as a whole. So what I'm wondering from the Premier today is, what does she recommend that people, say, living in Toledo or living in Fort Providence or you know, living in Ulahaktak, does she recommend that they do when they find a policy or a legislation that has a root of systemic racism in it? How do they reach out, and what's the best way that they make change from their communities? Thank you.
Thank you, member. Madam Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also see that a lot in various portfolios I've had with this government, and also as being a regular MLA. So the most effective way of reaching out is to work through your MLA. Your MLAs, that is their job, to bring concerns of the constituents to the government, but also work with the ministers. Every minister here cares about the people. There are some things we can't change easily. If it's something in legislation, that takes a longer process. But if it's a policy, all ministers care. And I've heard their comments behind, and they want to work. So if they can change policies, I know that they look at doing that. But again, Madam Speaker, it's important then when people feel that they do reach out, that they do call for help. It's not okay to just ignore it. If it's ignored, it will be ignored. So bring forward the issues. If you see this as systemic racism, work through your MLAs, work through ministers. We will do our best to help. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Oral questions. Member for Montfouille.
Merci, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker,
Madam Speaker, when I talked about the member statement, I talked about the elders that are living at home, of how they're taken care of how they're, a lot of times, we have a mandate, but we do not have, and elders are not well taken care of at home. The N.W.T. Housing Corporation, isn't that so? I have a question for the Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Household issues in my region. And Madam Speaker, in my Clinton way, our daily way of life, we always take care of our elders. Allowing elders to remain in their own home is a win-win for all around, for our elders, for our family, the community, and also for this government. We allow family members to live with their parents or grandparents, to look after them, and to care for them. These caretakers' income should not be considered or impacted when it comes to elders' household income in order to qualify for a program. Madam Speaker, I have a first question to Minister Housing Corporation is, that being said, why doesn't the N.W.T. Housing Corporation and this government use common sense and assist these elders with their housing needs without all the red tape that's before them? We need to step up, be proactive, and do a better job caring for our elders. And it's also part of our mandate, Madam Speaker. Merci.
Thank you. Minister of Northwest Territories Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hear the member's comment. I resonate with this very clearly because we have a lot of elders that do reside in our smaller communities. We do have limited amount of elders facilities as well. The Northwest Territories Housing Corporation has constructed nine plexes throughout the Northwest Territories to work with our elders and to have them age in place. But the other thing I hear the member about speaking about the household income, where they disqualify for programming based on the amount of people that are living within that public housing unit or within their private unit as well. This is something that's, I really take seriously, that, if elders are coming forward to apply for housing programs, that within the Housing Corporation we are looking at how are we going to be calculating, we are going to better serve our elders in the smaller communities who are residing in private homes, and to try to alleviate those barriers so our programming is more adequate and it's more accessible to our people in our smaller communities. To the member, I will follow up with him on solutions that we are working with within the Housing Corporation to try to alleviate the amount of barriers that we do have for the elders in a smaller community to access our elders programming. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Montfouille.
Merci, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we forwarded that information just the other day with pictures, and it's a real issue. And that obviously the screwdriver's been in place for a number of years. As you can tell, it's all rotten away, and it's unacceptable, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the couple applied out of N.W.T. I'm not going to get into specific detail with the names, but the couple applied, and the daughter's living with them, looking after them. Because of the daughter they didn't qualify. And that's due to the red tape that's before us. And when can we see the red tape lifted? It's getting cold. It's almost minus 20, minus 30 in our communities now. And these elders are struggling. And they can't fix the issue themselves. So we need a housing corporation, local housing authority to come in, fix that simple issue. But again, it's all the paper, the red tape, oh, you don't qualify. And just leave it alone for a number of years. How long are we going to leave it alone? Change our red tape now, Madam Speaker. Mercy.
Thank you. Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the Clecho area, we do have a housing working group that opens the door for us as a housing corporation, us as a government, to come in and work with the Indigenous groups. This is something I want to bring back. I'm looking at maybe a partnership or some sort of programming that we could work with the community where they could identify these areas and these programming that would adequately fit those specific communities. And also, I just wanted to say that it's really disheartening and unfortunate that a member of our elders in the Clecho area is experiencing this right now. I have received the email and my department has acted on it, but I know this is one of several cases throughout the Northwest Territories, and as a Minister for the Housing Corporation, we are going to be working and addressing these issues as we go forward, because there's one too many of them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister, member from Mofwee.
Merci, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Minister is correct that there's quite a few elders that cannot speak for themselves. In my region, they speak Clinchon language. It's very difficult for them to access N.W.T. housing program. We always say there's online programs, but they can't access online programs. So I'm glad Minister and her department is working with local housing authority to establish some sort of mechanism to deal with these elders. And I certainly do not want to stand here in February, March, addressing the same issue that's before us today. And I'm certainly hoping that will be resolved by then. Madam Speaker, just continuing on with my next question is, what progress, I raised this issue in the House before, has been made in creating a program under N.W.T. Housing Corporation so that qualified German ticket holders can go into isolated communities such as my community to do these critical servicing furnaces. We need permanent technicians in our isolated communities now before it gets too cold, Madam Speaker. Merci.
Thank you. Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And also, just in regards to the list of programmings, I want to advise the member that I will provide a list in February to the member of the elders programs that we did offer and the amount of clients that we did serve within these next months coming up. And also looking at the journeymen trades entrance and trades programming is a challenge for us in the Northwest Territories, but also for us for the Housing Corporation. We are working with the Clecho Housing Working Group. I will identify this with our Housing Corporation staff to bring this back to the working group, that this is something we need to partner up and we need to address, and to making sure that we are working towards certified journeymen within the Clecho area to start delivering this programming on our behalf, or else in partnership to work with the Clecho government. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member from Mofwee.
Merci, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, an elder once told me that enough of talking, do the action now, fix the problem. So there is an issue here, a real challenge for this elderly couple. And I'd like to know from the minister, could we have a dedicated person to deal with these issues? I understand she's dealing with the Clinchon government, the agency, and so forth. There's lots of talks happening, but elders want to see somebody that can service the furnaces, somebody that can service the plumbing. Could we have a dedicated service person, technician in a community to deal with those during this winter months? Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister for Housing, N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Northwest Territories Housing Corporation is really very strong and adamant about Indigenous partnership. This, I look at this as an opportunity, as I've worked with other communities throughout the territory where we had a similar issue such as this, and the Housing Corporation was able to enter into a community initiative program with the Indigenous groups. With looking at the issue for servicing the furnaces and looking at offering programming for the seniors in the Clecho area, I will follow up with the member and look at a possible opportunity that we could access additional funding to look at how we are going to have a representative in his riding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there are many small businesses throughout the N.W.T. that are still struggling to survive these difficult economic times. Some are finding work, and for various reasons, others are not. The N.W.T. Housing Corporation is in a position to provide that support to those without work. I'm referring to those businesses located in our regional and small communities. Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister of the N.W.T. Housing Corporation if she will commit to identifying those projects slated for the regional and smaller communities and work with those businesses without work to ensure they are provided some work, even if it means sole sourcing or negotiating the work. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that question because for the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation, hiring local is a priority. Hiring local businesses, Indigenous businesses, and what I had provided, I want to say last week, is that 95% of our contractors are local. And looking at what we actually can offer, I would like to follow up with the member as well too and look at his riding, because we do have a rollout now of RCMP units that are being constructed. We do have some public housing units as well that are going through repairs, and there is opportunity, and my priority as a housing minister is to hire local and keep the local people employed, offer training and opportunity, and I'm open to hearing the members' comments because I would like to become very strategic in how we deliver programs at the local level. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we do not provide enough support to our small community contractors. They're the ones that provide the much-needed employment in those communities and deserve our support and sometimes direction in order to build capacity. Madam Speaker, I would ask the Minister to commit to either doing away with the suspension list for contractors in these small communities, or at a minimum, work and support the contractors to ensure that they are successful and avoid failure. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corp.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. For the contracts and tenders that are put out, and we do end up with some carryovers because due to contract failures, and I don't want to see businesses not being able to access any of our to bid against our public tender. But then we also have to take into consideration the reason and the process that it has taken for us at that time. If we see contractor failure or else a carryover of a project, it does. We do take an assessment of that. But looking at the contractor suspension, I would look at this very clearly because I would not want to have a contractor suspended. I've seen it already in my time while I've held the housing portfolio, and I've been able to work with the client and been able to bring them back and having them to work for us again. But again, it's the quality of work that's being displayed that we've got to be very careful of. It ends up costing the housing corporation a significant amount if the buildings are not constructed adequately. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I previously stated, the N.W.T. Housing Corporation projects are essential and the bread and butter to small community contractors and a source of employment for the residents. Madam Speaker, I asked the Minister how many projects are slated for those regional small communities this winter, and is the Department in the position to add additional projects if required if we find contractors without work? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Minister of N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This year we had a few negotiated contracts that we have entered into with Indigenous groups that have not been finalized, but we have been approached with that interest. And looking at that, I would have to, I don't have the numbers right on the top of my head, but I'd have to get back to the member with the number of projects that we do have listed that are slated for the next couple of years. And also looking, I know the member is quite concerned about the contractors and also creating employment at the local community level, but I want to just really emphasize that that's the priority of the Housing Corporation, and we do try and do our best to making sure that our contracts stay local and they stay within the community, and we do emphasize on education and training. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, one area that the N.W.T. Housing Corporation can support our northern businesses is with the transportation of the material going into the communities on the winter road. We have contractors with tractors and trailers down the valley that will be looking for work this winter. Maybe with COVID-19 in front of us, it makes sense to use our northern contractors to provide those services. Madam Speaker, can the Minister commit her department to reviewing how they can ensure our northern contractors who supply trucking services are provided every opportunity to haul the material going down the winter road for their projects this winter? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the member was reading my mind. I just actually had this conversation with my department, and because of, we are in COVID-19, and the Housing Corporation did find it a challenge getting material into our smaller remote communities. So I was actually speaking about looking at our supply for this year and slating for the next couple of years for our projects, and how are we going to be getting them into the smaller communities and the trucking service as well too, and what is available in the territory. I will be looking at that, and I will follow up with the member. Thank you, Madam Chair or Speaker. Sorry.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my questions today are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. The Minister of Health and Social Services has spoken about the harm of alcohol to all of our communities multiple times within the House here. And so I'm wondering, and we've also heard multiple times about the upcoming alcohol strategy that is expected in the Northwest Territories. So I'm wondering if the Minister can just talk to us about what she intends the alcohol strategy to accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want the alcohol strategy to produce better health. We have some very troubling indicators for heavy alcohol use in this territory. For example, the rate of heavy drinking, which is defined as having 4 or 5 or more alcoholic beverages in a single sitting, is 43% in the N.W.T, and that compares to 19% across Canada. So better health means that people are not falling into the poor health outcomes of excessive alcohol use, and also not falling into the personal despair of excessive alcohol use. So to that end, the department has hired a federally funded senior advisor on the alcohol strategy, who started work in August 2020, and she is completing the following tasks: setting up a representative working group to guide the development of an alcohol strategy, reviewing feedback from an alcohol evidence to action workshop held in March on this issue, preparing a full work plan and engagement plan on this issue, and this work will be moving along with public consultation that will begin early next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm wondering if the Minister can speak to how they intend to roll out public engagement and make it accessible to everyone given the COVID-19 restrictions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I see engagement as a real issue, even if there was no COVID. The difficult thing will be to find people with lived experience to participate in the engagement, to talk about what will or could have helped them at some point in their journey. So I don't have the details of how that engagement strategy is going to work, but I do recognize that hearing from people with lived experience would be a very valuable part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm wondering if the Minister can speak to at what points during the development of the engagement strategy will the public be able to weigh in and see how it's going, or will committee be able to see how it's going as well? Does the department plan on waiting until the very end of the alcohol strategy to then release pieces of it, or the whole thing, or where is the public's opportunity to be involved beyond? Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is a fairly new project, but we have offered and are still willing to provide the Standing Committee on Social Development a briefing and take questions on what committee would like to see in an alcohol strategy. We are following an outline from the group called CAPE, which is the Canadian Alcohol Policy Evaluation. They have a number of different domains that they suggest that an alcohol strategy focus on. So that's the outline we're looking at now. My preference would be to make this an iterative process so that there's more than one occasion on which the general public can be involved in providing their feedback, and that the feedback could come in a lot of different forms. It need not only be written, it could be video, it could be voice, it could be song and dance, just whatever it takes to get the information. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Department of Finance houses our Liquor and Cannabis Commission and also administers the Liquor Act. So I'm wondering how the Minister of Health and Social Services intends to include the Department of Finance in this process, and how she sees the alcohol strategy influencing the work of the Department of Finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, these different domains speak to a whole-of-government approach. For example, impaired driving countermeasures would involve the Department of Justice. Marketing and advertising controls would probably involve the Department of Finance, where the Liquor Commission is housed there. Pricing and taxation and the physical availability of alcohol are also Department of Finance issues. Justice may take on the minimum legal drinking age, which is another recommendation in this set of issues to look at. So it's going to be important for the Department of Health as the lead on this to bring all these other departments in so that we can present a coordinated approach to alcohol use. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My first set of questions a few weeks ago when we started this session were on the Ingham Trail Fire Services, and my last questions will be on the Ingham Trail Fire Services. The member from Tunaday-Welladay raised the idea of DETA providing fire services to the Ingham Trail. My question for the Minister of MACA is that a feasible option, and have we done any work on that? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister of MACA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question was only asked last week. My department has been in communication with YKDFN and with DETA as well. As soon as we have more of a report, I guess, to provide, I will keep I'll keep the member informed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On my first set of questions, the Minister said there was presently a working group and we were dealing with the City of Yellowknife. My question is, has an offer been made to the City of Yellowknife of what they would need to continue fire services for the Ingham Trail? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of MACA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Department of Municipal and Community Affairs and the City of Yellowknife is working jointly on this initiative as well. We need to get out, we need to consult, we need to look at stakeholders, and we need to see what it is that we are able to provide at Ingham Trail. We still need to have the conversation with the City of Yellowknife. They are strategizing on their end as well. Nothing has changed. It's once we once we meet with the City of Yellowknife, I will provide an update to the member. As I said, that we have just started working with them within the last week. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to press the urgency of this issue is that if on April 1st fire services run out, first people lose fire services to their home, which is an emergency, but also a number of my constituents' insurance bills will simply double due to us not being able to sort out an issue here. So there's also a direct cost to my constituents that I would like to avoid. When can we expect the department to reach out to those residents and communicate with them? Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Minister Maca.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to sound as if I'm, avoiding the question, but there's a lot of discussion that has to take place before MACA comes in and starts to make the decision. We need to be working with the City of Yellowknife respectfully, and respectfully with the Indigenous groups as well too, and also speaking with the residents of Ingram Trail and what it is that they're looking at the fire services as well. Speaking with DEDA as well. There's a lot of parties that are at the table. I do understand the urgency for the for April 1st coming up. It's very close, but I will keep the member informed. Because I just right now I don't have an update, but we are working in conjunction with the working group. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess I am a little frustrated. The way I see this, there's three options. One, we contract with DEDA and we make sure that a fire hall that has struggled to get insurance and get a full crew of volunteers happens by April 1st. Two, we contract with the City of Yellowknife, who has been extremely resistant to providing services. Or three, in the next few months, we construct a fire hall on the Ingram Trail, which also seems extremely impossible. So my question for the Minister is, what is the plan to make sure fire services continue on the Ingram Trail? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd have to follow up with the member, but we cannot make decisions because we are working with the Indigenous groups and with the City of Yellowknife, and considering the amount of people that are going to be involved, strategically looking at how are we going to provide fire services in Ingram Trail. We are working with this, and we do have a strategy right now. I will provide the member with an update because it hasn't been finalized. We are working with the City of Yellowknife in respect to them as well too, and YKDFN. I need to be very clear and strategic when I prepare the response. I need to hear from the affected parties first. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've got a question for the Minister of Health. We're getting into the winter season, we're getting into the ice road season, and I'm just wondering if if the department is looking at any special orders or changes to the orders, or anything will be in place for the truckers, hauling to the mines and hauling down the winter road. Because I think we have that 30-hour turnaround in place, and I think we're going to be going over that, especially this winter when we're heading into Colville Lake, Norman Wells, and places like that. So I'm just wondering what the department is doing with respect to that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to the member for Hay River South for the question. It's an excellent question, and I'm sorry I don't have an answer ready to it, but I do take his point that this is something we need to sort out now. That 30 hours would not be enough time to drive into Colville Lake or drive up to the diamond mines, so there will need to be some consideration of how to make that possible, since those are essential services and time-limited services that are being provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With the trucks, coming into the territories and going up the winter road and to the mines and that, what are we going to be adding any monitoring to that? Are we going to step that up, say in Yellowknife and along the winter road as well? Is there anything different that you think might be happening in that respect on the monitoring side? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Member, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, with respect to the road to the mines, it's a private road, and there's a dispatch office in the industrial area of Yellowknife that truckers go to be dispatched. They leave at specific time intervals and numbers of trucks at a time. So that would continue. It's a private road, so they would continue doing that. And they have security on that road. And I know that they are vigilant about the speed limit and, you know, how many hours the driver's been on the road and so on and so forth. For the rest of the territory, I think that the enforcement would be maintained through the current border controls that are in place now. And I can certainly find out if they are planning to increase that capacity at all to deal with the volume of trucks that come up through the early winter. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yeah, I guess when I think about Hay River as well, like we have a number of trucks there, you know, coming in and fueling up, and you know, just knowing, I guess, kind of what's happening with monitoring and enforcement right now, all of a sudden we're going to have a lot more trucks in there, and most of them are actually, most of the truckers I think are following the rules, following the orders, but you always get the odd one that figures they can go around town and that. So I just want to make sure that, you know, Hay River, we're lucky, we've been fortunate, we haven't had a COVID case, but this winter I could see that happening just because of the number of trucks that are moving in and out of there daily. So I just ask that, you know, you know, I look forward to getting a response from the minister with respect to enforcement and monitoring for this winter. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Service, did you have?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I appreciate the member's concern. It usually is a lot of traffic. The road to the mines is usually in the realm of 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 trucks a winter over a 2-month period. So it is a very intense amount of traffic that will be coming through right from the border through the South Slave up into the tundra. And with respect to other truckers who deliver fuel to small communities on winter roads, I see the need to be vigilant there so that they don't unintentionally spread COVID-19 to those communities. So I will be in touch with the Office of the Chief Public Health Officer to ensure that these issues are on her radar as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just one last question, and that is there any, are we going to be looking at any quick tests for COVID where we can reduce the amount of time or assist, I guess, the truckers that are coming in here to ensure that that they are COVID-free when they come across our border? Is that something that we may be looking at this winter? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Member, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker, the problem with rapid testing is that it really doesn't work if you only do it once. There's a period of time over which somebody could become infectious, have symptoms, have a fever. So it's not, you can't really do one test and say, okay, that's good, you don't have any COVID. It's usually a series during the 14-day isolation period. I know that what they're doing now with essential health workers is a test right when they come in to see that they're well, and then they're asking them to really self-isolate except for those times that they are at work. So there is a model to follow there that may be helpful to making sure that truckers are not held up but are also well enough to go into the communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, our time for oral questions has expired. Written questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my question is for the Minister responsible for the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation on the National Co-Investment Fund. Can the Minister please provide the status of all applications to the National Co-Investment Fund of which the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation has knowledge? And can the Minister please please advise, 1, how many Northwest Territories Housing Corporation employees are currently assigned to work on applications to the National Co-Investment Fund? 2, what percentage of those employees' time is spent working on applications to the National Co-Investment Fund? And 3, what communication activities has the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation completed in support of increasing applications to the Northwest Territories Co-Investment Fund? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Mr. Clerk.
Madam Speaker, I have a return to written question 19-19-2, asked by the member for Cam Lake to the Minister responsible for the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation on October 15th, 2020, regarding homeowners insurance. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to the Commissioner's address. Replies to the Commissioner's address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports of committee on the review of bills. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Reports of standing and special committees. Tabling of documents. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I wish to table the following 6 documents. Taking action, a work plan to address the calls for justice in reclaiming power in place, final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. The interim public accounts of the Government of the Northwest Territories for the year ending in March 31st, 2020. The Northwest Territories Business Development Investment Corporation 2019-2020 Annual Report. Grants and Contributions Results Report for 2019-2020. The Consolidated Budget 2020-2021 Government of the Northwest Territories, and Northwest Territories Oil and Gas Annual Report 2019. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Tabling of documents. Minister for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to table the following 4 documents. N.W.T. Health and Social Services System Annual Report 2019-20. Clecho Community Services Agency Health and Social Services Annual Report 2019-20, 2019-20 Annual Report of the Northwest Territories Health and Social Services Authority, and Hay River Health and Social Services Authority Annual Report 2019-20. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible of Northwest Territories.
Thank you, Madam. I wish to table the following document. Pardon?
Sorry. That's okay.
The Annual Report 2019-2020, Northwest Territories Hydro Corporation and Northwest Territories Power Corporation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Minister for Education, Culture and Employment.
Madam Speaker, I wish to table the following document, Annual Reports for the Northwest Territories Education Bodies for 2019-2020 school year, ending June 30th, 2020, Volumes 1 and 2. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Tabling of documents. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Madam Speaker, I wish to table the following 2 documents. Operations Report 2019-2020, Western Canada Lotteries Program, and Northwest Territories Housing Corporation Annual Report 2019-2020. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Tabling of documents. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I wish to table an excerpt from the Globe and Mail of November 3rd, 2020, titled, "In Manitoba, an Omnibus Bill Puts Systemic Racism Against Indigenous People in Plain View." Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Motions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, whereas Section 54(3) of the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act provides that the Commissioner, on the recommendation of the Board of Management, shall appoint a law clerk on such terms and conditions that the Board of Management may recommend, and whereas the Board of Management is tasked with recommending an individual to the Legislative Assembly, and the Legislative Assembly is prepared to make a recommendation to the Commissioner, now therefore I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Satu, that the Legislative Assembly recommends the appointment of Ms. Sheila McPherson as Law Clerk and Mr. Toby Kruger as Deputy Law Clerk as recommended by the Board of Management, and further that the Speaker be authorized to communicate the effective date of appointment to the Commissioner. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Motions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Whereas Section 103 of the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act provides for the approval of sole adjudicators by motion of this House, and whereas it is desirable to have persons approved for appointment as sole adjudicators for conflict of interest matters under Section 103 of the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act, now therefore I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that the following persons be approved by the Legislative Assembly as sole adjudicators: the Honourable Maurice Haroff and Jeffrey Schooner, QC. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Motions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Whereas Mrs. Frida Martellus was appointed to the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment by motion 11-19(1) on December 10th, 2019. Now therefore I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that the appointment of Mrs. Frida Martellus to the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment be revoked, and further, whereas Rule 89(2) requires that members be appointed to the Standing Committee on Government Operations. Now therefore I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that Mr. Steve Norn be appointed as an alternate member to the Standing Committee on Government Operations. Merci, Madam Speaker.
The motion is in order. To the motion, Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Decho, that motion 24-19(2) changes to committee memberships be amended by adding the following. And furthermore, whereas Mr. Steve Norn was appointed to the Special Committee on Reconciliation and Indigenous Affairs by motion 21-19(2) on October 29, 2020. Now therefore I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Decho, that Mrs. Frida Martellus replace Mr. Steve Norn as a member of the Special Committee on Reconciliation and Indigenous Affairs. Merci, Madam Speaker.
The amendment is in order. To the amendment. Question has been called. To the amendment. All those in favour? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Members, we are now debating the motion as amended. To the motion. Question has been called. To the motion as amended. All those in favour? All those opposed? The motion is amended as carried. Motions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And now to the most important motion, the one that adjourns this House until February 3rd. I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that notwithstanding Rule 4, when this House on Thursday, November 5th, 2020, it shall be adjourned until Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021. And further, that any time prior to February 3rd, 2021, if the Speaker is satisfied, after consultation with the Executive Council and members of the Legislative Assembly, that the public interest requires that the House should meet at an earlier time during the adjournment, or at a time later than the scheduled resumption of the House, the Speaker may give notice, and thereupon the House shall meet at the time stated in such notice, and shall transact its business as if it had been duly adjourned to that time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Motions. Motions. Notice of motion for first reading of bills. Notice of motion for first reading of bills. First reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Range Lake, that Bill 22, Appropriation Act Infrastructure Expenditures 2020-2021 be read for the first time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Bill 22 has had first reading. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Range Lake, that Bill 22, Appropriation Act Infrastructure Expenditures 2020-2021 be read for the second time. This bill authorizes the Government of the Northwest Territories to make appropriations for infrastructure expenditures for the 2020-2021 fiscal year. It also sets out limits on amounts that may be borrowed by the Commissioner on behalf of the Government, includes information in respect of all existing borrowing and all projected borrowing for the fiscal year, and authorizes the making of disbursements to pay the principal of amounts borrowed. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The motion is in order. To the principle of the bill. To the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Bill 22 has had second reading. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration of Committee of the Whole of Bills and Other Matters. Committee Report 6-19-2. Minister Statement 77-19-2. Table Document 165-19-2. Table Document 166-19-2. Table Document 167-19-2 with member from Hay River South in the chair.
I will now call the Committee of the Whole. Sorry. Member for Frame Lake.
Right, Mr. Chair, appreciate that. Committee would like to deal with Committee Report 6-19(2), report on remote sittings. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Does committee agree?
Let's take a short recess.
We'll take a short recess.
Okay, we'll call the committee back to order. Committee, we have agreed to consider Committee Report 6-19, Bracket 2, Report on Remote Sittings. I will go to the Chair of the Standing Committee on Rules and Procedures for any opening comments. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I do have a few comments here. So in June, members will recall that we passed changes to the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act that now provide us with the authority to conduct remote sittings of the House. So the Standing Committee on Rules and Procedures was tasked with providing some guidance to the Speaker on how and why the Assembly might sit remotely and when it would be appropriate for a member to take part remotely and what changes or amendments to rules might be needed to enable all of that. So the committee reviewed emerging best practices from Parliament, provincial legislatures, some international examples, as this is an issue that's submerged, of course, in many countries around the world with the ongoing pandemic. The committee discussed each question from the Speaker at length. We debated various scenarios to come up with a set of recommendations in this report that tried to find the right balance and make sure that members' rights to participate in the Assembly are protected with making sure that we can try to do all of that efficiently. The committee also reviewed the orders of the day and proposed a number of changes in the event of a remote sitting. So, of course, these recommendations will basically serve as drafting instructions for actual rule changes. Those rule changes will come back to the House in the new year for review and approval, and then we can start to meet remotely as the Assembly. There's also a provision for these changes to be reviewed after each remote sitting to see if we can make improvements. So I'd like to thank my fellow committee members for their diligence and thoughtful review of our rules and procedures that led to the recommendations I'm going to present shortly, and I look forward to hearing from all of our colleagues as we work our way through. That's my opening remarks, Mr. Chair.
I will now open the floor to general comments on Committee Report 6-19, Bracket 2, Report on Remote Sittings. Do any members have general comments? Seeing no comment? Oh. Member for YK Centre.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, my general comment is I'd like to express appreciation to the committee for undertaking this work. We don't know when we'll need it, but what we have here is a very comprehensive roadmap of what a virtual sitting could look like. And no doubt there are things that we haven't considered, but I thank the committee for getting us off to a good start. Thank you.
Do members have any other general comments? Member for YK North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, first I would also like to thank the committee, and I guess I just want to make a note to not downplay the historical significance of this. There are lots of assemblies around the world that have been struggling with how to sit online, and committee has gone and come up with some very comprehensive motions of how we can do that. And this institution and legislative assemblies in general are not institutions that are quick to change or adapt, but I think committee really went there, and I'm excited at the possibility of being able to pass laws digitally. It's truly a step for democracy. So just don't want to downplay the significance of this. Thank you, committee.
Thank you, member. Are there any further general comments? Seeing no further comments, member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the comments from my colleagues. So, Mr. Chair, I move that this committee recommends that the rules of the Legislative Assembly authorize the Speaker to conduct part or all of a session remotely using an approved platform in the event of a state of emergency declared for the entire territory under the Emergency Measures Act or a public health emergency declared under the Public Health Act, and further that the rules authorize the Speaker to convene part or all of a session remotely if the Speaker is satisfied, after consultation with the Executive Council and members of the Legislative Assembly, that the health and safety or well-being of members would be at risk by meeting in person. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The motion is in order. To the motion.
All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion is carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I move this committee recommends that the mace, as a symbol of the authority of the people of the Northwest Territories, should be placed in the chamber on its normal stand, if possible, and if not, displayed in another manner in keeping with its symbolic significance during any remote sitting of the Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member, the motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Member for Hay Rivers North.
Thank you. I have a question about this recommendation. It recommends that the mace be put in its place, which is here in the Assembly on its perch, in the event of a remote sitting. Would this tie our hands in any way if the reason we're having a remote sitting is because we can't get into the building? Would it cause any issues for Legislative Assembly staff? How is that contemplated? Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, committee did turn its mind to this matter. Of course, we've recommended remote sittings only in limited circumstances. I think I mentioned the public health emergency, a state of emergency under the Emergency Measures Act, or if the Speaker is satisfied that the health, safety, or well-being of a member might be compromised. So already remote sittings are only contemplated in a limited set of circumstances, and recognizing that one of those might be if we don't have a building to meet in any further. So we did not go as far as to say that staff had to be here in this building, even if we're meeting remotely. I think that's an operational level of detail that we didn't really need to get into, and I think that we want to leave some discretion for the Speaker in how the House might conduct itself, including where the mace might be appropriately displayed. And there is provision in here for the mace to be placed in a symbolic place. It could be in the lobby or at another location as part of a video conferencing platform. So I don't think we wanted to get too prescriptive, but try to maintain the dignity of the House by having a mace or a representation of the mace in some way as part of the proceeding. I hope I've answered the question. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member. Are there any further questions? Question has been called, so all those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that the rules of the Legislative Assembly authorize the Speaker to allow a member to attend all or a part of a session remotely when that member is unable to travel due to a state of emergency being declared in the member's home community. The member is under an order of the Chief Public Health Officer prohibiting travel, or the Speaker believes travel would put the member's health or safety at risk. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member. To the motion, the motion is in order. To the motion. Member.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just very briefly, a committee did turn its mind to this, and we only wanted to allow members to participate remotely for a very narrow set of reasons, but also give the Speaker some discretion. So if people are taking discretionary travel or in some even business travel related to the Assembly, you know, sitting here is really a privilege and a duty, and we want to make sure that people, MLAs, make every effort to come here in person. So we prescribed a very narrow set of circumstances under which a member could participate remotely. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that Rule 1210, which states, quote, "When in the assembly, every member shall be attired in traditional Indigenous attire or in a manner that does not offend the dignity of the assembly," and of quote, "apply when a member is appearing remotely." Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The motion is in order. To the motion. Questions being called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passed. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that training and orientation for online sittings should be provided, and further that the Board of Management should look at providing a headset to each member to ensure consistency, and furthermore that any member attending remotely be required to wear a headset. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The motion is in order. To the motion. Questions being called. All those in favor? Motion opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that any member attending remotely by video conference be required to have a neutral background on screen, and further, if the speaker determines a background is distracting to the House, the speaker be empowered to order the member to rectify the issue, and if the member refuses, to turn off the member's video and allow the member to participate via audio only. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The motion is in order. Motion is in order. To the motion. Question being called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that whenever a member is attending session remotely, all votes on readings of bills or on any motion that requires notice be conducted as a recorded vote. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The motion is in order. To the motion. Questions being called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that when a member attending remotely loses their connection just prior to or during a vote, that the member immediately contacts the table officer to register their vote, and that the clerk will announce to the House how the member voted at the end of the roll call. And further, that 3 minutes will be counted from the end of the roll call to when the speaker announces the results if a member has lost connection prior to voting, to allow the member time to contact the table officer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The motion is in order. To the motion. Questions being called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends when conducting a roll call, the clerk call on the mover of the motion, followed by each member attending remotely by order of their normal seat in the House, then each member seated in the chamber. And further, that the members attending remotely, for the members attending remotely, they will be called no more than 3 times for their vote before the clerk moves on to the next member. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The motion is in order. To the motion. Questions being called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that during oral questions, if a member attending remotely is disconnected while asking a question, if the member is successful in reconnecting before the allotted time expires, the speaker will allow the member to continue their questions. And further, if the member is not able to reconnect before the allotted time expires, the member may choose to submit the full question and up to 3 supplemental questions in writing, and that the minister would have 2 sitting days in which to respond. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The motion is in order. To the motion. Questions being called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that if a minister attending remotely loses their connection when a question has been asked to that minister, then the question shall be redirected to the Premier or designate to respond. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favour? Opposed? Abstentions? Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that when a member files a written question with the office of the clerk, the member should note if, in the event the member loses their connection, the written question can be announced by the clerk and be printed in its entirety and answered. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favour? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that in the event a member loses connection while delivering a member statement, that the Speaker ask the member to conclude their statement once they are reconnected, provided the House has not moved to another order. And further, in the event that members' statements has been concluded when the member reconnects, the member statement would be printed in full at the end of member statements. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favour? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that the House adopt a revised daily orders of business in the rules of the Legislative Assembly for a remote sitting pursuant to the changes listed in this report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favour? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that the Legislative Assembly direct the Office of the Clerk to produce a reference guide for members and staff outlining key changes and best practices to be used while sitting remotely. And further, that the Office of the Clerk be mandated to update the reference guide as needed as new practices are identified. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favour? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move this committee recommends that after any remote sitting, the Standing Committee on Rules and Procedures be tasked with conducting a review and to provide any recommendations for improvements. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. Motion's in order. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favour? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Thank you, committee. Do you agree that you have concluded consideration of committee report 6-19, bracket 2, report on remote sittings? Thank you, committee. We have concluded consideration of committee report 6-19-2, report on remote sittings. What is the will of committee, Mr. Norn?
Mr. Chair, I move that the chair rise and report progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Norn. There's a motion on the floor to report progress. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favour? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress.
Report of Committee of the Whole. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, your committee has been considering Committee Report 6-19, Bracket 2, and would like to report progress with 16 motions carried. That Committee Report 6-19, Bracket 2 is concluded, sorry. And Madam Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with.
Do I have a seconder? Member for Yellowknife Centre. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Report of Committee of the Whole. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Okay. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I move, seconded by the Monroe member for Range Lake, that Bill 22, Appropriations Act, Infrastructure Expenditures 2021-2022 be read for the third time. And Madam Speaker, I would request a recorded vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The motion is in order. To the motion, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I recognize that I'm one of the few things that's standing in the way of a much-needed break for us all, so I'm going to try to keep my remarks pretty short here. There was a very significant announcement by the Minister of Finance in the House yesterday, and it's largely gone unnoticed by the public and the media, and that was some changes that the Minister agreed to make moving forward as a result of our discussions around the 2021-22 capital budget. There was $15 million added to the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation budget over 3 years to help leverage the Federal Co-Investment Fund $60 million carve-out. We also agreed that there should be a $2.5 million one-time increase in municipal infrastructure funding for 2021-22. I want to sincerely thank all of my regular MLA colleagues for our work together on these priorities, and to our cabinet colleagues as well. Moving forward, this is the kind of collaboration I want to encourage and work towards. This is how consensus government can and should work. People will know that I tend to be a fairly stubborn, principled MLA, so I want to make some remarks about the capital budget itself. And of course, it's the largest ever, and I'm quite concerned with the direction that it is taking, and I don't think even the finance minister is entirely happy with it. So, and I think this is really what I might characterize as a bad hangover from the last assembly of overspending on capital, and capital always not necessarily in the right areas. I support a lot of the spending in the bill, but we need to find a better balance between the programs and services and for our people and the large infrastructure projects, and I don't think we've achieved that with this capital budget. So therefore, I will not be voting in favour of the bill, but I look forward to a better balance in the next capital budget, and I'm happy to be part of a more collaborative process moving forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. To the motion, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I perhaps am a little less stubborn than my colleague from Frame Lake, but I share many of his sentiments, and ultimately I will be voting in favor of this capital budget. I think there are a number of problems, but I believe our cabinet and our government is aware of them. One I would like to see addressed is some of the smaller infrastructure at times. I'm happy to see that $2.5 million for our municipal funding gap, but we know there's plenty more work to do. The Department of Infrastructure's deferred maintenance budget is growing every single year, and I think sometimes as politicians, shiny new large infrastructure projects can seem, very attractive, but if we're not making sure the existing infrastructure we have is properly maintained, that's ultimately going to cost us in the long run. Additionally, I think there's a lot of work to be done with procurement, but I'm confident that this cabinet will go out and do that work. And therefore, you know, as we roll out this capital budget and we catch up on those carryovers and we get this money out the door, it'll truly employ Northerners. And lastly, I think all of us in this House are happy to see more money for housing and more money for our communities, and I think both of those items are central to our economic recovery and to our prosperity of our citizens. So I would like to thank everyone for their work on this capital budget, and I look forward to continuing discussions on the next one. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. To the motion, member for Trinidad-Willowday.
Merci, Chair, Madam Speaker. Again, you know, there's always, we can always make compromises, and I think it was a good example in the last couple of days how all 19 of us, or all 18 of us work together and look for solutions to find ways to pick away at our mandate items, because we have some lofty goals and we're doing this through a pandemic, and I'm really happy that we earmarked some allocation, some funds for housing and for AMACA, and I'm very glad to work with our colleagues, and it was good to see that that chemistry happen and make those things happen, so I'm very happy for that. In terms of the Appropriation Act as a whole, again, it's one of those things that I don't want to say upsets me. I'm disappointed. We need to see more for our small communities. There needs to be more evenness throughout our infrastructure items. And I said in the House before too, you know, like in the last, like over, I'd say 100 years ago, 90 years ago, there was a depression, Great Depression happened, and what a lot of the governments did too is they put money back in their infrastructure projects to keep people working, and I'm starting to see that trend again happening. So I'm hoping that happens here, because you know this is going to be a tough time for the next while, and we got to find ways to keep people working, keep people housed, keeping the food on the table, and not just in our larger centers and our regional centers, but in our small communities as well. That's what we need. But so with that, I won't be supporting this motion, but I just want to say, moving forward, I'm hoping we could find more equity, and I want to say merci to all my colleagues.
Thank you. To the motion, member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I'm going to vote in favor of this motion. You know, we have to work with what we have, and we have a lot of issues out there, and I think a lot of them are raised, and addictions was one of them that I think that we as a government really have to take seriously and put some effort into, and some financial backing. But you know, I look at housing in Hay River. There is a real shortage, so I'm glad that you know that there is money going into that, so we can access some of that co-investment dollars, rapid housing, and so on. The other thing is, when I think about this budget, I think about Hay River requiring probably a new water line, or at least a water line repaired. We also need a new water plant. We need new pipes in the ground. Some of them are probably as old as me. So there you go. So I think that what we did here is, you know, we compromised. You know, it was consensus government, maybe not at its best, but I think it worked. So I think we should be proud of what we did here and move forward. And so I'll be voting in favor of the motion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
To the motion, Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wanted to speak briefly to the collaboration that was already described, and I appreciate that. The collaboration sometimes to the outside, to the public, isn't necessarily obvious or transparent. It's one of those things where we don't want it to be seen as something that happens behind closed doors. It doesn't. It happens between MLAs. It happens between the people that have been elected here, and the conversations that are being had between Cabinet and between all regular MLAs. And those conversations started all the way back in the summer. There's been both presentations between the department, multiple departments in fact. There's been multiple conversations, both in terms of individuals coming to me and then of course on behalf of committee. So I do want to emphasize that collaboration, it really is quite a meaningful thing. There were a lot of conversations that were had, and that's what ultimately made this capital estimates better. It made it stronger, and it made it more representative. And Madam Speaker, we can't possibly do all things all at the same time. That's not possible, and it's not financially feasible or not fiscally responsible. But, Madam Speaker, we have to recognize and remember that there are needs across the whole of the Northwest Territories. We lag behind. The age of our infrastructure and the simple lack of infrastructure is a fact across the entire Northwest Territories, and we can't let that hold us back. We can't let that hold back the future prosperity of the Northwest Territories, and that prosperity depends in turn on having healthy people, educated people. And so I am happy to say that the capital estimates includes funding for schools, for health centres, for the fish plant in Hay River, lots of investments in parks, includes transportation corridors, including an MLA Norns riding. We've advanced a project. So this has really been an opportunity to look across the needs of the territories and try to find ways that we can collaborate, do the best we can with what we have. It is ambitious. Madam Speaker, it is ambitious. And fortunately, we do have the procurement review that's going to be taking place in advance of the timing of these capital estimates, so that hopefully we can make the dollars that are going to be spent here more sticky into the Northwest Territories, if that's the way if that's how the procurement review unfolds, and also ensure that when we have this procurement, or when we have the draft plan, or the, well, no longer draft plan, hopefully, that when we have this plan roll out, that we are really delivering on all our promises to ensure prosperity in the Northwest Territories, as I say. So I am very happy, again, that we are able to vote on this today. I'm looking forward to support, and I am also wanting to reflect the fact that it was at times difficult, but ultimately a consensus process that brought us here today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. To the motion. Question has been called. The minister has requested a recorded vote. All those in favor, please stand.
The member for Yellowknife South, the member for Range Lake, the member for Yellowknife Centre, the member for Hay River South, the member for Tabacha, the member for Nahendeh, the member for Satu, the member for Inuvik Boot Lake, the member for Hay River North, the member for Great Slave, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Day Cho, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Montfouille.
All those opposed, please stand.
The member for Trinidad-Welliday, the member for Frame Lake.
All those abstaining, please stand. The results of the recorded vote are 14. Sorry. There's 14 in favor, 2 opposed, 0 abstention. The motion is carried. Do you see that there? Okay. Yeah. Bill 22 has had third reading. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, will you ascertain if the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories, the Honourable Margaret Tom, is prepared to enter the chamber and assent to the bills?
Please be seated. Good afternoon, Madam Speaker, Premier Cochrane, ministers, members of the Legislative Assembly, and staff. Masi whākotre e jonai hethi taleta sitzera masi naherisi. Lehe e galat antara mitaure aun e jo du la nechanai tani vera e mejit re tegane lehe atintea go ijinga mas.
Grateful for it. Thank you very much. Haromasi na hirisi ka sago zeshi jokadi na taita. Masi.
Your patience during these challenging times. It is my honor to take this moment to encourage and remind everyone of the dedication and proud service made by current and past brave members of the Canadian Armed Force. Remembrance Day is on Wednesday, November 11th. It is a day when we remember and honor all who have left their homes and families, country, and more importantly, our freedoms. Some of these brave men and women never returned home. They died serving Canada. As your commissioner, I will proudly take part in the outdoor Remembrance Day ceremony at the Yellowknife Cenotaph. I will be accompanied by my aide-de-camp, and together with others at the ceremony, we will remember and honor the fallen and their ultimate sacrifice for our country. As this sitting comes to an end, I would like to wish each and every one of you good health, happiness, and prosperity. Please enjoy the Christmas season with your family and your constituents. It will be very different this year, yet it is still a joyful and blessed season. Be creative and continue to be good role models, keeping in mind the safety protocols put in place to protect the health and safety of all our residents. In closing, may you be gifted with continued guidance and vision as you work together cooperatively for the betterment of all residents of the Northwest Territories. I wish you all safety in your journey home to your loved ones. Now, as Commissioner of the Northwest Territories, I am pleased to assent to the following bills. Bill 15, Miscellaneous Statute Law Amendment Act 2020. Bill 17, an act to amend the Corrections Act. Bill 18, an act to amend the Legal Profession Act. Bill 19, an act to amend the Student Financial Assistance Act. Bill 21, Supplementary Appropriation Act, brackets, Operation Expenditures, bracket, number 2, 2020-2021. Bill 22, Appropriation Act, Infrastructure Expenditures, 2021 to 2022. Masicho, thank you. Huanani, merci beaucoup, Huana. Masicho.
Order.
Colleagues, on behalf of this House, I thank the Commissioner, the Honourable Margaret M. Tom, for being here today. It's always a pleasure to have her here in the chamber. Thank you also to the interpreters who have worked so hard throughout this sitting. We honour our official languages by using them. The interpreters make this possible for us. Thank you. My thanks to each of you. Your hard work and dedication over this past few weeks has accomplished a great deal, and I'm proud of the work that's being done. Colleagues, next Wednesday is Remembrance Day. We have observed Remembrance Day for more than 100 years. As Canadians, we are fortunate to live in such a prosperous and beautiful country during times of peace. For this, we must be grateful. Members, please join me in thanking our veterans and serving members of our armed forces. This House will not sit again until the new year, but we will remain busy. Our days will be filled with ongoing business of committees and government and serving our constituents. Remember to make time for those closest to us, our friends, our family, those who we rely on for support and assistance. These are the people who make it possible for us to do our important work. Take time to tell them how much you appreciate all they do. As we approach the holiday season, we must recognize it will be different this year. We may not be able to travel to visit family and friends or host the same feasts and get-togethers. Members, the holidays will be challenging this year, but as Northerners, we can and we will celebrate the season safely. Take time to check in on those in your communities who may be having a difficult time. Together we are stronger. As we celebrate the holidays, please remember to do so safely, follow public health orders, travel safely on our roads and on the land. And so I'd like to take this time to thank all my colleagues here, all colleagues here today. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Orders of the day for Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021, 1:30 p.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to Commissioner's address. Petitions, reports of committees and the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motion, motions. Notices of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters, Minister Statement 77-19-2, table documents 165, 166, and 167-19-2, report of committee of the whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Thank you. This House stands adjourned until Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021 at 1:30 p.m.
Order.